Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Average Folks in the Afterlife number 61. On this very sunny afternoon, as I think you can tell. And we're having a little mini spring here in southern Ontario. All of a sudden it's mild and sunny. And here it is, February. Continuing on with Marilyn Hughes' Odysseys of Light. Oh, I don't know if you can even see that. Oh, no, that's better. And I'm not sure if this book is still available as a new edition. You may have to go the ebook route or look in the used book areas. But it's well worth getting a hold of. And another book came after it, Crystal River Flowing. That's also very good. From 1991. One of the early contenders, first out of the gate. There was only Robert Monroe and a couple of others out when this arrived in the English-speaking world, shall we say. Who knows what is out in Italian or Dutch or Japanese. It just, unless they've been translated, we don't know. Anyway. My professional background before assuming the role of mother and homemaker was general assignment reporting. Some of the experiences I began to have seemed to be geared for that background, as the universe was my beat and my spirit was the camera. I like that. After expressing an interest to my teacher about what those on the other side would do at a big scenes of disasters, where many people die, I was sent to cover the disaster team. Suiting up in silver boots and a silver helmet, I joined a group of spirits who helped victims of airplane disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, bad car accidents, fires, and all types of traumatic, sudden death situations. Everyone in the crew manifested the boots and helmets for the sake of the souls crossing over, as in the confusion of fires and wreckage, the physical familiarity was key. Manifesting in a physical way captured the attention of dying souls who were in shock. Now, of course, I've made this point to you guys several times before, and but I think it does no harm to hear it from another source. And certainly when I read this book, in I would say 93, 94 perhaps, it was, I think, the first conscious encounter with that sort of thing myself. In my reading, and my own consciousness out of body was still fairly slim at the time, episodic and slim. And it was a while before I discovered Bruce Moen's accounts of disaster retrieval teams. And then, wrote about my own experience with Henry in Eternal Life and How to Enjoy It, and him training me to work at a disaster. And although that book came out in 2004, I did actually write it around 1998, late 1998. So just a little timeline for you there. The disaster crew works non-stop as they are whisked from one disaster to another all over the globe. They feel it when they are needed and quickly will themselves to the site. Their job is to pull the dying souls out of the mess and hand them over to spirit guides, as there is always a lot of wreckage, smoke, and physical obstruction. The souls who have died are usually quite disoriented, and they do not realize they have passed on. That is very often the case. Regardless, they can't seem to see past the wreckage to where they need to go. We handled about 15 disasters on the night I worked with them, as they are constantly going from one location to the next. After a couple of hours of work, I went on to my next assignment. ... After my encounter with the disaster crew, I needed a little time to wind down. I was taken to several groups of entities who all appeared to be subconscious astral, meaning that they were not consciously aware of this visit and were probably sleeping. Each group had a different twist, but all dealt with an aspect of spirituality. We all go to these types of groups at night and seldom remember them. This is one way that our subconscious work is accomplished. with those of us in our physical illusion. Love, support, and growth were the goals of these groups. The group I spent the most time with was a group that enjoyed playing a game called Negative Positive. As this was something I was working on at that point in my life, it was helpful to me. The object of the game was to find the positive angle to every negativity thrown your way. The group leader, who appeared to be a spiritual guide, would say something negative, and our goal was to find the positive angle. We played the game for several rounds, and everyone, including myself, was excited about the positive transference that was possible with negative situations. We all go to groups that cover aspects of our own spiritual growth in our sleep. Whatever you may be going through, there is a group that covers it. Many who have just passed over go to these groups in their transition back to the spiritual world. It certainly isn't boring on the other side. The word death is such a misrepresentation. And I know many of you have experiences of attending classes or seminars on the other side, and sometimes actually being the person that's teaching the seminar. And as I've said before, this is more common than you would think. Even if you consider yourself a newbie at this sort of thing, and a rank amateur that's just learning, you're often much more accomplished on the other side than you think you are. And so just keep that in mind. You have dreams where you're teaching a class, don't dismiss them. You probably are. During the night, a recurring dream about the death of a robber began. A couple had taken a walk in their neighborhood, leaving a fairly young child alone in the house. When they were gone, a robber had entered the house and, finding the child, locked her up in the closet. Upon returning from their walk, the couple noticed the broken glass and found their little girl. Police cars were just arriving, as the neighbors had noticed the disturbance and called them. They went throughout the house to make sure the robber wasn't hiding and came up with nothing. But they had not checked a room that was partially closed off, and the father asked them to check, just to be sure. Upon entering the room, the police were confronted with the robber and immediately fired 5 shots. The robber was dead, and now he was a lost soul. Immediately I began communication with the entity. Compassion for this entity overflowed. Despite his obviously criminal status, it was his first major crime, and he had already made a decision that it would be his last. When he saw the little girl looking so frightened, it touched a part of him, and he knew he had to change his ways. But his reality did not allow that, and now he felt that there was nothing left for him but to burn in hell. Amazingly, he had seen the light, but felt he must wait to be taken to hell. The feelings were welling up in me for this entity as I explained that God loved him. His intensity increased, causing a bit of physical discomfort, and asking him to please respect my space, he calmly complied. Explaining some universal truths and realities to him, he excitedly absorbed them. Reaffirming that he was greatly loved, I finished telling him what he needed to know and told him he could stay near me until he felt secure in leaving. His appreciation was clear, and a short time later he turned, leaving a cool breeze in his wake. Journeying inward and into another dimension, I ran across another being's reality. This being had created thought-form tables and wasn't allowing people to pass by his tables without proper identification. Confusion ran rampant inside of me as I was viewing this situation from a physical perspective. Wanting to pass by, I created my own thought-form ID, but he would not let me pass, saying I did not have the proper ID. Creating many thought-form identification cards, including ones that I knew my husband had, he continually refused my passage. Looking around, I noticed that several entities were fully aware of what was happening to me, but did not come to my aid. Confused, I gave up and began pondering this reality in a corner of space, when a beautiful female entity appeared before me. She was a very wispy, yellowish-white light being with flowing hair and dress. She explained to me that this man felt very unloved, as his wife had left him and he had no children, and he felt his family did not care. Therefore, he'd committed suicide. Since then, creating this reality allowed him to reject other beings the way he had felt rejected. When I arrived, he could sense that I had much love in my life, and this made him want to reject me. As I had attempted suicide in this lifetime for similar reasons, I understood, and though the conclusion was an illusion, the pain was real. Returning to where he was, I hugged him and sent him thought forms of my love and understanding. It was okay that he had trusted me harshly. I understood. I'm so sorry that you suffered so much in your lifetime, but you really are greatly loved. Let go of this illusory reality you have created for yourself. There is so much more to be experienced. The universe is a loving place, and you are an important part of us all. A moment of love was shared between us, and he began to release himself. Apologizing for treating me like he did, the anger began to release from his being as he felt forgiveness for his wife and family. After a few moments of oneness with each other as fellow beings of the same light, his reality disappeared, and he joined other entities to move onwards toward the light. A valuable lesson in oneness was learned. My original anger was replaced with understanding and love. Once I felt that, I was able to flow with the energy of the universe and help a fellow being in need. This can be applied to the physical realm, as we all know obnoxious people, but rarely try to understand the hurt that has created that behavior. We are all one, and we can feel that that oneness with all life if we so choose. Find out why and do not judge. While visiting my friend Marilyn, my Indian's presence became very distinct. As we continued to chat, the energy was increasing, and I instinctively knew that he wanted to channel through me. I'd never channeled before, but I just went with the feeling and allowed the eternal to guide me. Going into a meditative state, energy waves began to come through my body, beginning at my feet and up towards my head. When the connection was complete, I felt a jerking sensation in my head by my sixth chakra, in between the eyes, and my eyes jerked upwards. Laughing hysterically, the Indian came through, and after 10 minutes of uncontrollable laughter, Marilyn asked him what was so funny. He responded that it felt so unusual to be in a body again. After all, it had been years since he'd been in one. We found out that his name was Red Jacket. The name was connected to his status as a war planner in the Indian Wars. My friend, having had a hard time selling her house, and he told her, "No, don't worry, it'll sell." A few weeks later, it did. He ended his chat by saying he loved me very, very much and that I had loved him very deeply as well. Desiring to meet me in the spiritual realm, he asked that I work toward that goal. Happy to have made it through, he bid us adieu. That night, an angelic being, displaying a very female essence, channeled into my being. Her goal was to instruct me on the channeling state, how to hold the energy more efficiently, and refining the energy to make a stronger connection. Working with me for about an hour, her essence was very loving and seemed very powerful. At the time, I believed this was going to help me channel Red Jacket. Time would prove the inaccuracy of my conclusion. Later that day, Red Jacket channeled through me, refining the energies we did not speak. Perhaps it was necessary to complete this process a few times before successful channeling contact could be made. This lasted a couple of hours, and it felt wonderful, rather like receiving a celestial hug. Afterwards, I felt closer to Red Jacket, as if some of my subconscious memories were being stirred up. Theresia had said something about the Indians that became very clear to me. The Indians flowed with the divine plane of love and therefore viewed death and separation differently than we. They were to hold the love that they felt for someone in their hearts rather than letting the love hold them down in grief or sorrow. Death or separation did not change when it had come to pass. In their thoughts, they would think of the loved one in the context of the time they were together, as if they were still there. That's kind of what I do when someone dies. Regardless of the circumstance of the separation, it did not change the love that already existed. Red Jacket felt this way, and he wanted me to feel that way too. Still very involved in the physical illusion of love rather than the reality. There was very much for me to learn. My daughter, Melissa, had been angry since the day that she was born, screaming for 4 months straight, and after that she was frightened if anyone came into the house. The doctors called it hypertonism, and I knew there was more, I was sure, and I consulted Teresa. Melissa, as far as she was concerned, was an American soldier with Oriental blood who fought and died in Vietnam. Traumatized by the war, in particular the innocent children being slaughtered, returning to the earth was especially frightening for her. She had wanted to come back as a boy, but chose to become a girl so as to avoid any possibility of repeating her previous war-torn life. She saw the world as a scary place, understandably so. Melissa, my husband, and I had other connections too. In my life with Red Jacket, she was my sister, and after my death, she raised my Indian child. I was repaying her by raising her in this lifetime. We were sisters in many lifetimes, brothers in others, and when we weren't related, we grew up together in an orphanage. The interesting twist to the story was Andy's involvement. My daughter and I were always in competition for him. In one lifetime, Andy had courted both of us extensively, but decided to marry her because she was more traditional than I. It seems that in all my lifetimes I have been more on the racy side, Melissa more traditional. Andy and I had a more passionate love for each other, but Melissa was traditional, and he knew she would take care of him. My feeling was that he was small-minded to make such a decision, and I was hurt. In our next lifetime, I had the affair. Oh, how we switched the roles. We were balancing our karma. Interestingly, Melissa was a priest in the same parish with me in my life as a nun. In fact, we had been attracted to each other, but this made him, Melissa, feel very uncomfortable, as it was too confrontational against the church. Well, I've been through that one before, and so have some of you. Melissa was here this time to learn to confront her reality and to realize that life can be fun. She needed to break away from doing what consensus reality expected of her and instead do what she felt was right. It is interesting to see how many types of relationships we have had with those we love. Clearly, love simply is. There is no distinction or categorizing of love in the spiritual realm. It just is. My, that's bright in here, isn't it? I could lower the blinds, I guess, but there's something kind of interestingly spooky about the light. Feeling a strong urgency to go into the channeling state again, I had my husband set up a tape recorder and he prepared to be my partner. And he was still a bit skeptical, but I felt he should give it a try. As the entity began to come in, he responded and ran to answer the ringing phone. Ringing phone, did you hear that one? Surprised and excited, I learned that it was not Red Jacket who had come through, but my teacher, and his name was Emmanuel. Explaining that I needed to give Andy a little time as he viewed spiritual growth as a hobby rather than a way of life, he asked me to be patient. Feeling a little angry at Andy, I did not accomplish this right away. That's often the case with couples. Spiritual growth is more important for one than the other, and the other one has to sort of, tolerate it. I see it all the time in clients that I have. Emmanuel was an entity who was at the level that Christ was at in his last incarnation, whereas Jesus had evolved to be an even greater being. It was important to Emmanuel that I'd learn to channel, as this would open up the doors of communication. His message was of oneness and beingness, and it was important that I learn to nest, as I had not done this in my other lifetimes. This was all information that Theresia had given me, and I asked Emmanuel about her. He said, she is an enlightened being who chose to return to Earth to help in the physical form. Trust her. She's a beautiful being. After leaving the channeling state, I noticed a marked increase in my awareness of my spiritual friends. Their energy was noticeable to me at all times, and their voices guided me in the right direction. Sending a message of love and gratitude to my teacher, I felt a cool, chill rush over my body, and I knew he reciprocated. Later, in a hypnotic trance, I led my husband Andy through his memory of his days in the cavalry. Walking into a fort that appeared unfinished, he felt excited and apprehensive at the same time. He noticed the men working to finish building the tall gates and some of the buildings that the cavalry officers and their families would live in. Remembering our wedding day, he described me as wearing dark blue rather than as traditional white. Feeling as if he didn't really know me very well, he was just happy to be marrying a woman that he felt was very pretty. A few years into the marriage, he felt that he was still very happy. The two of us had gotten along very well and it was working out. Pressing him forward, I asked him to recall the events that led to his learning of my affair. Expressing his physical discomfort, he saw himself sitting atop a horse on his way to battle. He felt angry and said he no longer cared about his wife, me. On the battlefield, he described the carnage, the anguish clear in his voice. Moments later, a total calm came over him and he said, I don't feel a part of that scene anymore. I feel like I've turned upside down and I'm watching from above. I feel like I might be dead. Trying to, with no success, to access the actual moment of his finding out about Red Jacket, I slowly brought him out of his hypnotic trance. It was obviously too painful to deal with at that point. In the vibrational state, later, bordering on a very high dimension, I heard the voice of my teacher. The fear of seeing a ghost kept me from willing sight. And the manual responded, this is an important step, one that you must take. In order for you to grow in your abilities, you must rid yourself of the fear of ghosts. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good idea. Working up the courage, I willed sight. Dumbstruck by what I saw, Emmanuel responded, laughing, see, it isn't so bad to see a ghost. Marveling at not only the beauty of the place I was in, but the feeling, I exclaimed, oh my God, this must be heaven. This really must be heaven. My beautiful teacher manifested himself in the same way as he had to Theresia. Beautiful black hair of medium length, moustache and beard, a long white shimmering robe of light. What was most enthralling, however, was his beautiful, radiant eyes. His eyes held the deepest intensity I'd ever seen, and all they could express was love. What with all this talk of robes that we've been hearing of recently, don't forget, guides could show up in blue jeans and a cord jacket. One of my guides, or was it one of Henry's guides, showed up in a golfing outfit. I can't remember now. You have to read the book. But not everybody wears robes, okay? If your guide thinks he's going to get a charge out of you, he or she could show up in a tank top and a miniskirt and heels. Or, a baseball player's outfit. Any number of things. Looking around at the dimension I inhabited for the moment, Emmanuel said, this is where I often dwell, my dear. Bright colours, purples, pinks, blues, sashayed across the sky of lights. This dimension carried with it love, peace, and the joy of indescribable portions. Multicoloured sparklers filled the sky, and the dimension shimmered with its beauty. Allowing myself to be swept up in the beauty and peace of the moment, I flew about like a bird with no need for wings. Red Jacket appeared and told me that he needed to take me back with him. Holding out his hand, I took it. Entering into a black tunnel with a bright light at the end and exiting in the 19th century, Red Jacket dropped my spirit into the body of the woman I once was. Immediately I looked down. I was wearing a long dress with a petticoat and it felt heavy. Walking along the dirt roads, I was heading for a dingy bar, which was not more than an old barn with front doors opened wide. Inside, my husband was arm wrestling with a group of men who were getting very rowdy. My husband was not a big man. He was a tad shorter than I, with sandy brown hair. The two men with him were quite large and dirty. Ooh. They were both with wavy black hair and mustaches. All the men seemed to be wearing clothes out of the television show Gunsmoke. Dirty brown pants with suspenders and dingy shirts that used to be white. Some wore old hats, but most did not. My husband ordered me to leave as soon as he saw me. After all, this was no place for a woman, and they were busy with menfolk talk. Angered by his reaction, I turned and left. On my way back to our home, I passed by the prisoners' quarters, a building made of what appeared to be sandstone rock with one or two windows filled with black metal bars. Inside one of the windows, I saw the face of a young Indian boy, and he motioned for me to come over. "We're very hungry. They do not feed us. Can you help?" Compassion for this poor soul filled my being, and I promised him that I would get food in return. Upon return to the prison, I noticed the intoxicated condition of the two guards. One had fallen asleep and was laying in the dirt, smelling strongly of whiskey. The other stood tall against the prison wall in his blue cavalry uniform, holding his rifle upright, aiming for the sky. Bottle in hand, it wouldn't be long before he joined his friend on the ground. "Sir," I said with a curtsy, "I would just like to bring the prisoners some food for their bodies and perhaps some food for their soul. I've prepared something for them to eat, and I know they will be ready to hear about the Lord on a full stomach. I'd be mighty appreciative if you'd let me help these poor souls enter into heaven." The guard flippantly moved away from the door and turned to unlock it. "Well, ma'am, that's mighty Christian of you. Good luck to you, and God bless." Walking into the door and down a few steps, I could not help but notice the disgustingly filthy conditions the Indians were being kept in. The prison was part underground and partly above, and the stone steps led to a small room, maybe 10 by 10, which housed about 15 people. There were other cells, but I did not venture into them. Apparently there were some prisoners who were kept privately in locked cells, and these were the most wanted Indians. The Indian boy, who could not be more than 15, was very appreciative that I had responded to his pleas. The others remained suspicious for a short time until they could see that my intentions were good. While watching the Indian people eat their food, a decision was made within myself that this would not be the last time I fed them. I knew I had to return. As I began my ascent up the rock stairs, Red Jacket pulled me from the body, led me through the tunnel, and relinquished me into my present physical incarnation. Yes, there's another thing that guides can do, take you and plop you into a past life, which may come to your memory as a dream, but that's often what they do. Later, after leaving my body, I was whisked on a cloud to New York City. It was night, and the stars shone in a fairly clear night sky. The Empire State Building loomed above the skyline, and I whizzed around its beauty. Flying high above the city, I enjoyed the beauty and soared peacefully. After a short time, I went to New York University, though at the time I did not know a college by that name existed. Cruising through the hallways, I watched students walking along their way to classes, practice sessions, and home. A performance was going on by the university band and choir, and I flew into the plant-filled auditorium where they played. Flying about, I spread my usual love vibrations to the packed room. Up in the bleachers, I sat down next to a family of 4 and let them wonder about my presence for the next few minutes. After the performance was over, I cruised down the hallways, feeling the grooves in the stone walls. My first feeling about this was that this trip to New York had something to do with my future. Later, I realized that I have a parallel lifetime going on in New York. Among other things, I would later visit the apartment and workplace of this other self. A parallel lifetime is another lifetime that is going on in the same time frame, but another reality. For example, if I chose to go to New York and find myself, I probably would not, as that me exists in another reality of this time period. This sort of thing can be very confusing. Yeah, it can. But in the spiritual realm, time does not exist. Therefore, you can exist at whatever time, place, or planet you choose. Even at the same time as your time is an illusion, you can enter whatever reality you desire. The parallel reality thing, there's many other experiences that have mentioned this to me or written about it. And I'm not convinced of their interpretation of the experience. I think it's maybe another being in their soul group, the soul group being the group of souls that is projected from the monad, the higher self, onto the physical plane. Each of us belong to a higher self, a group soul, a monad, that can have anywhere from, 10 to 100 souls in it, or even more. Monads are very high beings that can do all this sort of projecting. And we all are projections of monads, higher selves. So that would be my interpretation, rather than, another version of yourself in New York, but another New York. I don't really believe that are parallel realities. I think the people that you meet in the New York thing are in the New York that you can go and visit, but it'll be a soul that's related to you, but it won't be you. Anyway, others would disagree. You may find that in the out-of-body state, I may describe experiences that seem to span a great deal more time than the 2 hours or so that I may actually be gone from this plane of reality. Time only exists in dimensions where it is created as a structure to enable the function of society. Yes, now that is right on. When you leave your body, you also leave behind that structure of time. Time is like a kaleidoscope when seen from the eternal. It stands before you as a menu of what options you may choose from, which realities may serve you, and bring you to greater light. You may leave this time frame and return in any time frame that serves a purpose to your growth. Whether it be to time travel to peer at other lifetimes which hold secrets to your present, or having the capability to return to your body after lengthy excursions into light, at a time compatible with the point of reference you left that form, your present physical lifestyle will always remain intact and working smoothly. For most of us, our guides will lead us to return within a few hours of our departure. Otherwise, our bodies could appear comatose for 2 weeks or more Earth time, which is not usually for our highest good in this realm. Time and timelessness, it's all relative, and this is why we can do it. Well, there's lots more interesting stuff in this book, and we'll get to it on the next show, number 62. And in the meantime, ponder on these things and be patient with yourself as you stumble along in your growth. And don't beat yourself up over not having the experiences that you would like to have. That'll happen. And until next time, friends, so long.